And hey, folks, how's everyone doing? Hope you're doing well. I am coming to you from, I would say normally beautiful Franklin, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville, but unfortunately today is awful. It's rainy as heck, and actually kind of a generally miserable day, but a great day to sit inside and talk to all y'all. So anyway, hope you're all doing well. We have a number of things to get to today. I'll actually try to follow something like, I don't know, a plan or an agenda. I think that's what they call them. But before we get going, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already on the YouTube channel. It helps us get the message out to all the latecomers and so forth, because otherwise, if you don't get enough action like that, apparently they don't send out the notes to everybody, so that's a thing. Anyway, today we'll be talking about some ComicBase news. We'll be dipping into a little bit of industry stuff. And then the big topic for today is variants. We've had a lot of interesting discussions over the last week or two amongst the staff and some other folks about what to do with this crazy situation. And we have some thoughts. Want to share them with you today, get your feedback as well. And then finally, I want to end with something that is actually kind of a cheery note, just, something that I like that has come out recently, and thought I'd share that at the end. So anyway, let's see. By the way, hi to, let me make sure that my keying is up and everything else. Hey to Mike out there in Vancouver, Washington, 84 under cloudless skies. I'm jealous of the weather in Washington. I never thought I'd say that. Calgary, Alberta. Hey John. Hey Mike. How's it going, everyone? Great. So let's get down to it. If you guys have been keeping up with all the latest interim updates on ComicBase, version 1822 is the latest and greatest. It's the same as last week, so that part has not changed. One thing worth noting, if you were one of our overseas customers, or just up in Canada, or down in Australia, or wherever the heck you are, one change that came out in recent days is that when you first use the database on a machine that is set to something other than US dollars as your local currency, it does, the very first time you do an update to a flag we use to tell us what currency you're converting in. And if somehow your database had been in, say, Australian dollars or Canadian dollars, and it hadn't somehow you hadn't had that set appropriately, the resetting it might cause some changes in your values, because what's happening is if I have say Canadian dollars are I think they're like $1.23 Canadian dollars equals $1 US. If your database had been set as in Canadian, but it was really keeping its values in dollars, US dollars, now that it knows to sync all that up, if it hadn't before, there was a certain history of your database where things were done at a certain time and place and so forth. It might have gotten out of sync, so you might have been looking at US dollar prices all along, and so when suddenly you see them in Canadian dollar prices, it might be a little bit of a shock to you, if that's a thing. So if you do see the very first time after you've downloaded the 1800-ish series, if you're running in those situations, you see a big dollar change, don't panic. Everything's good. It just means that you're actually just seeing your database in the currency that you meant for it to be in, that it wasn't. It was set in US dollars before. And if you want to ever change it back to anything else, we covered that in a previous show, but basically just change your currency settings on your Windows, and next time you launch ComicBase, it'll say, hey, I noticed your currency setting is something different than the database was in last time. Did you want to change it over and run the dollar conversions or not? And it should do so quite faithfully. So that's the only note I wanted to say on that score. Other than that, there is an update in the works for today, so it is Wednesday. We are trying to get these out now on Wednesdays. I don't have an ETA as far as the time on that, but it should be fairly short. And it should be, I know it's going to be fairly heavy on pictures this time out. I'm not sure about the rest of the score. We're kind of scrambling after the long weekend, so we haven't had as much time to chat about what's in the update this week as usual. But should have all the latest Marvel and DC stuff certainly that shipped, and any other new comics that made it to our editors. So they should be all in there. Other than that, let me see here. Total. If you guys are watching the stats on our website, we have a count of the total number of pictures that are in the archive edition. If you're just eagle-eyed, you might have noticed that that number dipped down slightly this last week. And the reason is because we did one of our like annual or biannual just scrubs of the picture library to get rid of any foo in our picture library that was not associated with a given issue. So if an issue had been, listed under one title and we'd start putting pictures under it, but then the title changed into something else, and somehow the issues didn't get moved over, or sometimes people submit issues with kind of roll your own variants that don't correspond to anything in our database, and we kind of hang on to them in case the variants show up one day. Whatever the thing is, autographed copies, things that we don't normally put down the line to you folks. None of this stuff would have come down to you, but if you're watching the counts, you might have noticed that, wait, you guys were almost at 740,000 pictures last time out, and now you're at 733 or 732, whatever the heck the thing is. That's what happened there, is we just did a big scrub. So it doesn't actually have any practical effect, but in case you were wondering, that's the story on that. And then let's see. Oh, and the last thing I want to say is, and let me see if I can get the Chiron to work. Yes, that did work. Take note of my email, if you would, pbickford@human-computing.com, because we'll be talking about some stuff that talks about really the design of ComicBase going forward. And if you want to be more directly involved in these sorts of discussions, there's only so much we can do over the YouTube chat or any kind of email exchange and so forth. We have a special channel we've set up. We have a tool called Slack. It lets us chat back and forth as if you become a member of the development team, where we let certain insiders, kind of like inside watch the sausage get made and participate in the design decisions as they're coming down, get early builds and so forth. If that's something that appeals to you, let me know. And again, I'll put the Chiron up there one more time. So let me know, and I will add you to the Slack channel if we can use your expertise, and then essentially what we'll do is we'll invite you to get going as we do early builds of the next versions of ComicBase. Now, as I mentioned last time out, we are getting very close to the point where we kind of they call it forking the build. Basically, there's a straight path that ComicBase 2021 follows, where little minor tweaks, things here and there, things like that. But basically, there becomes a whole separate effort where we kind of take everything we had so far and we start building the next version of ComicBase. So we're going to start going down that path where we're going to be less aggressive about doing little futzy things with the current version and focusing on building up the next big changes to ComicBase. If you want to be part of that effort, let me know and we'll take it from there. Okay, so that was that part. Let me just do a quick check of the chat here. Hail over to Greg over there. South Jersey, early summer again. Is everyone got great weather except for us? Hot in Seattle? No way. Andre, hey, good to hear from you. And hey, Gregory. Brazilian independence from Portugal in 1822. Good grief, this is like turning to the History Channel. Right on. Anyway, cool. A beer flavored, John P. Wish there was a beer flavored Slurpee, whiskey sour flavored Slurpee. Yeah, don't we all? All right, so on to other things. Industry news this week. The big news, and let me get the Chiron ready for this one because this is a stunner. So you guys remember me talking about how Warner Brothers and Discovery Channel Warner had divorced themselves of their AT&T had dropped all their media holdings and was going to focus on delivering delivering actual networking and things like that, and they spun off Warner Brothers, parent company of obviously DC Comics, into its own entity, along with as a joint venture with Discovery Channel. And they didn't have a name for it back then, but they put their heads together and they came up with something great. And I know it's going to shock you all. The effort now is called, wait for it, yes, Warner Brothers Discovery. That is the name of the company. It is, as they say, the stuff the dreams are made of. Shocker. Yeah, that's it. No new news as the rest of it. The merger will actually take place in 2022, or at least it's scheduled to. I don't believe there's any regulatory burdens keeping them from moving forward on the whole thing. So it should be back to full speed ahead for them. It might have something, I'd be very interested. It sounds like there's a lot of behind-the-scenes shakeups with different directors and different greenlighting or not greenlighting of different animated and other motion picture projects over at DC. I'll have more information on that when things get going. Needless to say, the streaming wars are going to be in full effect all next year. All right, so other things. Let's see. We talked about the selection off, so yeah, that's it. I will say a brief note: if you have an Amazon device, an Echo, an Alexa, any of that kind of stuff like that, you might be interested in a note that apparently you have until end of the week, give or take, to go through and change a privacy setting buried somewhere in your account or your device or somewhere. I'll see if I can find a note to the news link on the whole thing. I do not use those devices myself, so I'm not the hands-on guy to tell you about this stuff, but apparently, unless you opt out of it, because the default is you've opted in, your Amazon device is going to suddenly turn itself into a mesh network device at the end of the week. Apparently, they were thinking ahead of time. Mesh networks basically are a way of weaving together Wi-Fi across any device that's capable of passing along a Wi-Fi signal onto the next one and so forth. It has great technical merits. I use a mesh network in my own house to basically steer signals around corners and bond the whole place together, so I can have internet on the back patio. It's just as strong as the stuff upstairs. They can work very beautifully. It's kind of curious, the idea that if I had Alexa and my neighbor had a Ring doorbell and something else, that I suddenly might be sharing internet signals with my neighbor, which I'm fuzzy, frankly, about the privacy implications of this one, because it seems like anyone who had all these things was already sending their data straight to Amazon. So the fact that the signal's bouncing off their neighbor's Alexa, I can't just offhand make a compelling case as to why that's good or bad, other than it's interesting from a technical standpoint. It's certainly not something I think you probably signed up for on purpose. But it does have some technical niceties in that it makes it possible to do things like, say, for instance, if I had, I know Apple does something like this with their lost key tracking, or Tile, a device I have hanging on my keys so I can find them. You can have it so that it doesn't just ring when it gets near you. It can actually ring when it gets near someone who already also uses that type of device. It can say, oh wait, this thing was spotted by a guy who happened to be walking by the Starbucks where you left your keys behind, because he also carries a device that's compatible. So it tends to bond everything together in quite a big way. Now, on a global scale, I'm not sure if I love the idea that we are all becoming, physically, our doors, our houses, our TV sets and everything, whether we want to or not, are all becoming part of one big giant global network. Not sure if I love that, but I'm going to admit, I haven't really thought the whole thing through. But apparently, like I say, you have until the end of the week or so to opt out of it, or you're opted in and it's going to be turned on. So, note to all my Alexa friends and my Ring doorbell friends, honestly, I don't have any of that stuff, despite the obvious utility, because I'm not 100% comfortable with the idea that every conversation I have, every person who walks past my front door, etc., all that information gets fed down to Amazon Central. I like the utility of it for myself. I don't love that it's basically turns my whole house into a listening post. But that's me. Your mileage may vary, as they say. Okay. And let's see, like a Wi-Fi repeater. Yeah, John. A Wi-Fi repeater. It's a little bit more sophisticated than a simple signal pass along. The mesh network. The idea is that it almost works more the way that, say, a Ethernet router does in your house. If you have a hard Ethernet router, the idea is that I have a signal that's meant to go to someplace over here. It's just that I know that there's a hop here and a hop here that might get me there, and it can find a way to route around to its final destination using the least or the strongest signal hops. So it's not just everything this guy does, it passes on to the next guy, and everything they see passes on to the next guy. There actually is the idea of traffic routing built into the idea of a mesh network, so it is less. It's not going to degrade your network in any real way, but it does. Like I say, it's interesting, the idea that my Ring doorbell might be passing along my Alexa traffic, for instance. I'm not sure how I would feel about that. I just know that personally I don't like the idea of any of my things in my house listening to me 24/7. So, I'm that loser who even has Google Voice turned off, so I can't, just talk to my phone and say directions to the store. So I'm that one guy who has to type it in just because I just feel hinky about the whole thing. But a lot of people might love it, but yeah, worth knowing. Let's see. Pete, how do you do that for cleaning the cover? I need to do the same here for the catalog, cleaning the cover. Andre, you're going to have to give me a little more on that. I'm not sure if I understand it. I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. But give me a little more, and I'm sure I'll back it up. This is the whole part where I'm trying to think of what I'm about to say and what I just said, and I probably missed the reference. So apologize for that. Okay, so let's get on to it now. So I'm going to warn everyone, we are about to get deep into the weeds on an issue that is of great interest to, I don't know, several folks out there. So if you came here for just the ComicBase news and you don't care, you trust us all to sort this out amongst ourselves, that'd be an excellent time to go out and have a beer. But in the meantime, the rest of us, I wanted to talk about variants and what huge situation these are just getting to be over time. You guys might recall back one of my earliest shows last year, I talked about how I'd done a review of the number of variants over time. And back in the 1940s, I actually was surprised by this. There actually were a few dozen variants that had happened, mostly regional price variants in different parts of the world. The same thing in the 50s. There were, I think a couple hundred that had happened over the entire decade. But then you got into the 70s. Price variants in particular became a real thing. The variants that would be the same comic published by, say, Marvel and then republished by a republisher, or like the Whitman variants of different comics. I think it was Dell and Whitman. Those got to be quite frequent. So we actually would list a few thousand variants of all type of description amongst those things. And then the 80s and 90s hit, and the curve just went like this for variants. I mean, it went from nothing edging up to it just went vertical, especially in the 90s, where starting in the 90s, these seemed like such innocent days. Back in 1992, when we first got started with ComicBase, we were like, man, we have to deal with the concept of an issue number and say, well, we were smart enough to know when issue numbers, they could have a type in front of them, like an annual, okay? And I know certain other people, like the Orr Street Guide, had made a different decision. They said, the Spider-Man annual was completely unrelated to Spider-Man, and I don't think that was right. Or the giant size specials, they were their own, for our king size specials or the annuals or, books or something. It seemed to us it made sense to tie those to the base title. Our basic idea the whole time was, if you were a sensible comic retailer, would you have stuck a different dividers in there to separate the annuals, or would you have just stuck them at the back? So we had the concept when we first started out of the, say annuals or anything that made logical sense in context of a given title belonged with that title, and so you had the idea of a comic type. And then you had issue numbers, which we knew at that point back in the 90s, people were starting to mess around a bit, and they had like half issue numbers, and there was one guy who did a pi issue number, which we put down as 3.14. Later in the 90s would come really horrible things like infinity issue numbers or negative issue numbers. But we dealt with that okay. We knew that issue number was a decimal. And then you had variants, and it was so, gosh, we were so young. We had our dreams in front of us, and we were thinking, variants, gosh, can we ignore them? And I was like, well, as much as we'd like to, it seems like people like buying them. So, people really are going to pay a different a price for the silver version of this comic book, the silver logo one, as opposed to the regular one. Or sometimes there was the $1.95, direct market special edition with, heavier paper, which was separate from the regular edition of the X-Men or so forth. So you had gold logo versions. Like sometimes it shows, Image Comics was very big at this in the early days, where they would have a special version of their comic book, which, if you bought a copy of Wildcats, if you might have bought a copy of Wildcats with a certain ink on the logo for the word Wildcats, but if you went into the Wildcats panel at WonderCon, or they went to the Wildcats panel at San Diego Comic-Con, and you were one of the lucky first 3,000 ticket holders, you might have found, my goodness, was a platinum logo, which looked a lot like silver to me, version of the same comic under your chair or something as you walked out, and then you could, either cherish it forever or, run it down to eBay and sell it for $20, and make some of your hotel room back. I mean, this is clearly a thing that was of interest to folks. We couldn't ignore it, and we tried to be as descriptive as we could back in those days. We would have things like if there was issue number 1, just 1 would be the regular issue number. 1/GO would be the gold version. 1/SI might be the silver version. If you were that guy who had the 2 different versions of Wildcats. And then American Entertainment was a big variant set of guys back in the day. AE. There was the Wizard Ace editions, which was ACE, BR for bronze, etc., etc., etc. If you ever go into ComicBase and you want to see what our thinking looked like back in the day, just go under Setup, go to Item Variations, and these first several ones up here very much reflect the thinking at the time. Hey, the 3D edition, you could have a regular edition of a comic and the 3D edition. 3D, that made sense, right? Counterfeit, this one I think is almost exclusively used for Cerebus the Aardvark, but there were deluxe editions on the better paper and so forth, and it all kind of made sense back in the day. And then it didn't, because hey, if one variant's good, why not have 2, 3, 17? And eventually we just got to the point where, I think the one that really did me in is, it was before Zenoscope came along, but, controversially there were nude editions of thing where you'd have some, busty gal on the cover, and in the regular edition, she's just wearing a costume, and the nude edition, which cost invariably way more money, the same person would be not wearing the costume, or at least not the top. And so you start off with things like nude edition, all right, and then you have platinum edition, and then you got to the really stupid stuff, the platinum nude edition, PLND, and then you start realizing, okay, there's the virgin edition, which is the comic book without all the logo type on the front. So if it was Belladonna or something like that, if it just had a picture of the title character or some other character on the top, and it didn't have the words Belladonna by Zenoscope or whatever else, that would be known as the virgin edition of the thing. You could have the sketch edition of the cover, which is you'd simply take the early art when it was, say, inked but not colored yet, and that would be the sketch edition. But you'd start piling these up. So what do you do when you have the leather-bound platinum nude edition sketch cover? It was clearly not going to be supportable. I mean, we at a certain point we just declared, all right, you win. We can't keep up with you. There's no way we can come up with a sensible set of descriptive, variations for these whole things. And so we just basically threw our hands up and we said, all right, variation A, variation B, variation C, variation D. And I think at that point we went up to maybe I, which is as crazy as we'd ever seen, right? I mean, 9 different variants of the same cover. Crazy. Within a year or two, we were forced to issue updates to ComicBase, which just simply filled out all the variants all the way up to Z, thinking, you know what, we'll never use them all, but, there was that issue of Spider-Man, went all the way up to Q. What are we going to do? We may as well just bite the bullet now, go all the way up. And then we got to today. Specifically, we got to our friend Godzilla Kingdom of Monsters. I think this is the one in 2011. I might be thinking of a different type, but I think this was it. IDW, and this is the one that just broke us. To looking at this one over here, we have the A cover. We have the A second printing cover, which, by the way, I had to change this one right before press time, right before showtime, because someone had mistakenly put in as 1-2, which would be second printing of the number 1. There never was a number 1. There was just only A, B, C, D, E's, and so forth. So that'll be in today's update. But, there's a B cover by Eric Powell. There's a Big Eye cover, which I guess describes that pretty well. Yeah, it's a big eye. It was a retailer incentive. So you sometimes see these ones as RI on the covers, and if you look right up here at the top, you might see this is RI-A, which is to say the retailer incentive cover. Which, hey, why didn't you guys say just RI as one of your abbreviations? Well, because that was the RIA cover, because there was a retailer incentive B cover, and so forth. There was a WonderCon exclusive where if you went to WonderCon, you could buy this one. And then we got into the crazy ones. The deal with Godzilla was it was going to be kind of a big property, and they said, you know what? If you guys go and buy, I think it was 1,000 copies of this comic book, we will do you a deal. We will make your own special edition of the cover with Godzilla's crushing your comic store. So here is the 8th Street Books cover. Here is the somebody's cover. I can't even read that. Acme Comics, Shazam. Yeah. Anyway, it goes on and on and on. The same kind of general idea. They only had to redraw part of the cover. Alakazam. It was the 13 Gazengen was the one I couldn't read. Astro Zombies, etc. It goes on and on and on. The idea, if you were a retailer, is you're thinking, hey, I get a chance to be on something kind of big. I mean, this thing's going to sell a bunch of issues. People are excited to see Godzilla back, and it's kind of neat to see Godzilla crushing my comic store. And the deal is I had to buy 1,000 copies of number 1, but you're thinking, well, I can sell them for more than the regular $3.99 because it's my special cover. This is the Austin Books and Comics, cover. Surely I can get more than the $3.99 for it. If I get $9.99 for it, and I don't even need. If I sell 300, I've broken even, and I'm left with an asset. So I mean, what could go wrong? And as long as there's buyers, you could make bank doing this and have something that's kind of neat in comics history. So hey, more power to you. For their point, IDW sold gajillions of copies of this one with very, very minimal effort. I mean, it did not take a lot of time for the artist to draw in the differences between all these different comic books. I think they really did a little bit more effort on Bedrock City. I guess they owed him a favor. Everybody else, pretty much the same kind of idea. Oh, okay, I like the people running out of the whole thing. But you're drawing this much of the comic book again and again, and you're selling 1,000 copies every time you do it. That's a good deal. So, anyway, we had a problem though. Our variants only went up through Z, right? So A through Z is 26. 27 if you count if there was a regular edition cover. So what do you do when suddenly there's 84 covers of the same comic book? And the answer was we punt it. We abused the one field we had, which would allow you to go an infinite number, which was the printing field, so basically we called all these things, we call it we said they're the E cover, and if you were to look at this one, if I were to print this out as a label, it would say that this is the 7th printing of the E cover. It's not the 7th printing, it's the very first printing, but it's the 7th version of the version. So yeah, the ID label this prints is not right, and there's no way to make it right, but it was the only way we could get the issue number in there. We weren't going to call it a different issue number. That wouldn't make any sense. It's not 1.0001, it's not 1.0002. It had to be something that fit into our general scheme, but the letters only went so far. So okay, so all right, bad on us. What are we gonna do? But how often are they gonna come up with something that has more than 26 variants? And up until I don't know, a couple of years ago, you say, well, look, there's been a couple dozen comic books ever that exceeded 26 variants, and so some horrific versioning of abusing printings and variants of different types and so forth. We kind of muddled our way through it. But now it's, especially with Kickstarters and custom printing and things like that, it's getting to be so frequent. I don't think we can keep the charade up anymore. I don't think we can look at ourselves in the face and say, this is really working to abuse the printing field to deal with all that stuff. At the same time, we're also having many other problems with variants in terms of when you don't like. So good news on the Godzilla ones is we at least got the list of here are the 84 comic stores that are going to be involved in this one. We can actually start and type them all out ahead of time, so people could know that 1-E/67 was the whatever big dollar comic books or variant or whatever else. We at least got that list. Nowadays, very frequently, no one gets the list until well after the fact. So, in other words, they'll ship with 13 variants, and we'll put those dutifully into ComicBase as 1A through M. But then there'll be a convention variant. Then someone will go back and have a second printing of an earlier variant, where they'll do it all over again. A series of signed limited editions with certificates of authenticity, remarketed through somebody else, and so forth. And so you'll just sort of pile up this stuff bit by bit, and then it becomes very ambiguous at that point. Well, okay. The Q variant came out. Is that the remarked one from WonderCon, or is that the one where it was the blank sketch cover before he remarked it? I mean, and so what happens is, if we didn't get the list at all, and we're never going to encounter this ourselves personally because we don't go to every place on the planet they sell comic books. So if someone just happens to pick one up somehow because I happen to back at the $50 level on Kickstarter, which we're not going to do that for everything. And if these things aren't known until they happen, we get to know about the variant when someone submits it to us and they say, oh, here's a cover you haven't had before. I just chose the next number in line and I gave it the number, which is exactly what we'd want you to do. And it works pretty good, provided we're pretty much on the ball. We submit those the second we hear about them, and it doesn't, and they come in onesie twosie, right? I mean, so if there had been 13 variants and a 14th one comes out, hey, it's pretty obvious what you're going to call it, right? But what if there were 23 variants and then they ship another 8, right? What do you call those new 8? And the answer is, who the heck knows? And so increasingly, there's been a lot of just chaos with handling these things, and it bites me. Even just as a seller on Atomic Avenue, we'll list some issue of I think a couple weeks ago someone bought a copy of Deceased from me, and it was listed under one variant cover, but someone had resubmitted it with a different picture, and then there became ambiguity with the buyer. Did you want the one with the purple background or the one that we had originally listed with the D background, which someone had decided later on was a different thing. We try very hard to not ever switch the designations of comics once we publish them, once we put them out there. But, confusion can erupt. People can submit pictures. If we didn't have a picture for the D cover, first time, and someone submits that, and they say, oh yeah, this is the Polito cover, and it looks something like Polito's art, we're like, oh, who are we to say that's not? Maybe Polito drew 2 covers. Which one did you mean? And we don't really know all the time until we put it out there. And then if later on things get confusing, it's madness. It just really gets bad. So we got to deal with it. We got to deal with the idea that there are variants that go beyond 26 on a regular basis. There are things we have definitely put in place on our end to try to make sure that we never accidentally redesignate variants once they're put out there. But we have to do better in a situation where the data is coming from everywhere. It isn't just coming from Diamond. It can be coming from Kickstarter. It can be coming from different distributors. It could be coming from publisher, direct promotions. It could be coming from remarketing folks like it used to be J Comics would do a lot of these things, Graham Crackers, things like that. They could be kicking out their own variants right and left at the same time everyone else is kicking out their own, and no one's publishing any kind of list. When that comes out, I would like to have a way for us to publish the information in a way that causes as little confusion for everyone as humanly possible. Let me just, because I've been talking for a while, I'm just going to do a quick check of the chat here before I go on to what we're thinking in terms of a solution. How did I find the orphan covers? Yes, Andre, reach out to me after the show. I can hook you up with. I can hook you up with the tool we used for doing that. We have a utility program we wrote, which frankly just goes to every listing in ComicBase, finds the picture, and then makes a clean copy of the picture folder, which is all the things we found, and then whatever's left are the strays, and then we just leave them behind. Yes, Grace says, when is it not an excellent time to get there? Mark D with a C says, number of variant covers one of the things wrong with the comic industry today. I can't disagree with you. Whatever. The math, though, I mean, like I was hoping in the 90s, I was hoping this was a flash in the pan. That people would do it a little bit and they'd stop. I have stopped hoping. Not only it's gotten to the point where I believe I didn't have time before the show to get the latest stats on this one, but the last time I think I looked, because we talked about this in a show again about a year ago. I want to say at the time something like 77% of all comics being solicited were some sort of variant. They were, it might have been like an A, B, and C cover of a Doctor Who, etc. In which case, all three of them are variants because there never was a regular, so forth. But it's clearly is a trend that is accelerated beyond all words. And the math of why you do that is because, frankly, it takes so little to make a new cover. If all the interior contents are the same, you've only paid the license once, especially if some of the variants are just mechanical translations of the others. I mean, if you want to have a tint cover, for instance, all you've got to do is swap out the inks on one of the plates that you've already printed, and you've got a tint cover. If you want to have a sketch cover, you've already paid for the art, right? So if there was a sketch that, all you got to do is take the art before you colored it, print that instead, and you've already got it. So out of one set of art, you could easily get 4 or 5 variants out of it for the cost of swapping the production plates. And sometimes with things like tint colors, you don't even have to pay for a plate change. All you have to do is to pay for an ink change, which, depending on how nice your printer is to you, might be $100 or even 25. So if you think you can sell that again, of course you're going to sell it. I mean, if the math says, if I sold 20 copies of this thing or 50 copies of this thing, I'd make my money back. You're never going to see an end of these, especially not if you can also price them up. You say, hey, there were only 50 printed of this, there were only 25 printed of this one, and so those ones are all, of course, worth a jillion. So you sell them initially for $100 each, whereas the regular copy sells for $4. You're like, well, why wouldn't I? I mean, the payback literally might be I sell one copy. So yeah, we're not going to see an end to it. So at this point, I just want to deal with it. Yeah, John P says variants of the bane of my comic ordering right now. Agreed. Oh yes, and DC did the same thing with Dark Knight 3. Yeah, it's funny because Dark Knight 3 was one of the only times when I thought, I've been talking to a lot of comic, artists and so forth. We pay to have a new, version of ComicBase, drawn every year. We design the cover, and we pay an artist to color it and whatever else. It's like, we could get in on Frank Miller's Dark Knight 3, which Dark Knight 1 was legendary. Dark Knight 2 was okay. Dark Knight 3, we haven't seen Frank in a number of years. It could be good, it could be bad, don't know, but hey, how many copies we got to order of a $7.99 comic book to get in on this one? And the answer was like 1,000. And the only reason we didn't do it to have our own ComicBase copy of Dark Knight #1 is because they wouldn't allow us to design the cover. We had to pick one of, like, they gave you a choice of like 2 or 3 different house artists or something for some of these ones, and they didn't let you have a lot of input on what it was going to be. And so I was like, well, what's the fun in that? And so we didn't go for it. I mean, I love my logo, don't get me wrong, but seeing the ComicBase guy slapped on the front of a comic book, yeah, I've seen my own logo enough times to have that be not quite as special as it might otherwise be. But yeah, that's the thing. Wow, and Greg is 1 of 10. So the reason you went with the printing number solution for variants is because you could basically use any whole number to designate the variant. Yes, that was exactly true. And we did think about variant number, except we've already got a variant. But I suspect you and I are going to get onto a page that's quite close to each other. If anyone wants to read this very long train from Greg. All right, so let's see here. 11 of 10. No matter what system you use, nobody's submission of variant should be accepted without the appropriate descriptor in the notes field. Absolutely. Now that's even pick which cover you want when adding comics to your pull list. Absolutely. All right, so let's go back to the whole question, right? So what are we going to do about all this nonsense? We know it's a problem. We know that as extensible as our system for making item numbers is in ComicBase is. We dealt with so many threats in the past. We dealt with negative issue numbers. We dealt with infinity issue numbers. We dealt with not irrational numbers like pi. We dealt with variants up through z. We dealt with, I mean, like the worst one is something like, annual number 17.5, third printing, D variant. I mean, we can actually handle crap like that. But we can't handle 150 variants, not without making everyone mad. So we had some discussions on this one, and our thoughts kind of went along these lines. So if we were going to have a variant description, right, because we don't, an item number's got to be an item number. We can't, the concept of an item number is way too busted in. It's too integral to the concept of everything we're doing to change this one without just breaking ComicBase. I mean, like, just everything would break. I mean, this would not be an easy patch at all. I mean, it would just break the whole damn thing. But they say, well, how would you use as a variant designator? So it has to be part of the variant field somehow. But what do? We wanted the variant designation, whatever we do, it has to be extensible to cover all the variants. So in other words, it has to be able to go up to, like, if they do 150 different variants for a given comic book, we got to be ready to handle it without breaking the system. It has to be ideally guessable. I mean, we'd love it if you could look at something on the comic book and guess what we would have called that variant. We'd like it to be descriptive, so ideally that I mean, and again, this might be one of those things where we can't have it all. But in an ideal world, you'd like to be able to look at a comic book and say, oh, I'm looking at the Romero cover of this thing right here. Well, clearly that's going to be the blah 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 variant. And lastly, it has to be short. You can't have these things be a million miles long. So when you get up to the idea of, all right, this is deceased number 1, it's the retailer incentive Quintana Virgin remarked sketch edition, you gotta capture all that stuff in something that isn't 8,000 characters long, because this is its item number. That's that column at the far left of ComicBase that way over here. So I mean, if this column suddenly has to be as wide as the whole thing in order to even tell what version you're talking about, we got a problem. So we thought on this one quite a while, and different proposals came up. I'll tell you where our thinking's at right now, and honestly, because of the limits of what we got with YouTube, I think probably the best way to handle this one is if you've got better ideas, please reach out again. I'll run the Chiron one more time. You can shoot them over to me if I put this up there. You can shoot them over to me. Why is this not showing it? Oh, come on. Oh, I see, because I've got picture-in-picture on. Let me turn that off, and then I can put the Chiron on. So if you put in pbeckford@human-computing.com and just say, hey, variants or something like that, or better yet, reach out to me, and if you want to get involved in the Slack discussion as this thing shapes up, would like to go back and forth as we develop out the solution, because again, it's like you saw, I knew this would be a thing. Even when you have a very simple question like around like a cover cleanup utility, when we're getting it as a chat over YouTube, it's impossible to get enough context going back and forth with the time delay and the multiple people involved in the discussion to really have a really good back and forth. Whereas you can do that using some of these other methods. But at the minimum, please do reach out, because I do believe you guys, the folks who take the time to watch the podcast and care about their own comic collections and ComicBase enough to give us this thing, you're going to give us better ideas than we've been having on any number of subjects. So please, I want to hear your ideas if you've got an improvement on anything I'm about to tell you. So what we're thinking, given all the goals, go back and put that slide up again, is originally I was thinking it'd be really great if we, extensible is non-negotiable. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, that's the thing where we broke it with Z. One early initial idea was, all right, well, after Z, we'll just do the Excel thing. We'll go AA, AB, AC, AD, and then we immediately break the system even if you go there with AE, because AE already means American Entertainment. Pretty soon you get to BR, which is bronze. And besides, you're kind of getting into a world where, like, yeah, if you've done cell editing in Excel, this makes sense to you, and to nobody else does it make any sense. We look at the way that variants are described to us on our solicitations, we get them heads up from publishers, typically with something saying, this will be the Virgin retailer REM, Quintana cover. They won't tell us what it looks like half the time, but that's at least how they give it to us. They basically have a field that describes the variant without ever giving us a number that tells us which one it is. I mean, they have like an order number for it, and that's as close as they ever get, which I guess is fine enough for them, but I don't think we want to switch our item numbers to be just order numbers from, retailer X. Is probably not a good substitute for item numbers in ComicBase. Yeah, we got that problem. So guessable. I mean, you'd like to be able to look at something on the comic book and say, hey, what is the variant that you guys would have chosen for this comic book? And I guess another thing to keep in mind is that sometimes you can't solve the problem outright, but if you do have a really complicated problem when you're designing anything, you always want to, as much as is possible, you want to design for the usual case and support as many of the extreme cases as you can get away with without just absolutely compromising the utility of the usual case. So the usual case, I mean, it used to be the overwhelmingly usual case, is that there's one comic book, right? So that's why, you called the regular issue number 1, number 2, number 3. And if there ever was a variant, you'd call it 1A, 1B, and so forth. But the usual case was, that whole numbers were the most common thing by far. Nowadays, the idea of a handful of variants is by far the most common situation. And so the ABCD, E thing, it works pretty well, for everything except this increasing number of crazy, items that's coming up. One thing that does work reasonably well is, and let's see if I can pull this up. I'm going to pull this up on ComicBase because I was about to wave this in front of the camera, but then I realized I'm going to be waiting for this to focus forever. Let's have a look at a couple comic books I just indexed today. So here's the Union from Marvel. There we are. And I just had issue number 5 come through my hands today. All right, so here's number 5. And if we look down here at the barcode, now, there actually is a system in place that is supposed to work for this, and it really does most of the time, where if you look at the bottom of the barcode, let me see if I can make this larger. Yeah, all right. Okay, so you've got down here on the barcode, 59606 means Marvel Comics. 09742 is the abbreviation, is the number that Marvel gave for designating this particular title in their catalog. So you've got, Marvel has room for, many, many more, titles before they have to start reusing the title numbers over here. But, that I assure you does not bother them. The 5 is a check digit. Don't worry about him. Over here, 005, that means issue number 5, right? That's what these first 3 digits are always supposed to indicate. Followed by that, this is supposed to be your variant. This is your variation right here. The 1 means it's the regular issue. And this one over here is supposed to be the printing. So the 1 there means it's the first printing of that issue number 5, variant number 1. So that's how that's all supposed to go. And, God bless them, most of the time it works. So let's go ahead and look at the abbreviation for 5A. And here we are. 59606 Marvel Comics, series number 9742, which is the Union. All right, this is issue number 521, which means it's the second variant, right, or the second version of this comic book, and first printing again. Again, under the idea that there was the idea of a regular cover, and Marvel will even tell you. You see up here, this just says 5, and then when you look at 5A, it says, look, it's a variant edition. And so we, of course, call this 5 and 5A. That makes sense. It worked perfectly well. It's how it's supposed to go. And more often than not, that's the way variants play out. Now, you guys will, being clever folks, will realize, well, what about Zenescope, which routinely puts out more than 9 different versions of a comic book? Well, then they started using the printing field to not mean printing of the barcode, but they're actually pretty good for the first 9. And so when we're looking at a random comic book from Zenescope, where they told us that they might have said that this is the raw edition, they might have said this is the gore cover, or this might be the sweet cover. That's how they list it on their sites. That's how they list it and everything. But the barcode tells us that we know which one was really A, B, C, D, and E, F, G, because the numbers follow the sequence. And that gives away the game for us, again, more often than not. So we're already at the 97, 98% case on variants on these guys, just following what the barcode tells us and using the appropriate letter codes. So far, so good. But then when Zenescope wants to do all sorts of other, convention, sketch, and whatever else things, at that point the system just goes to hell. They either start reusing codes, or they abuse the the printing field, or they just say fuck it and they just do whatever. At which point, when we know the barcode on those things, we'll say, well, the following 3 comics had the same barcode. Which one was it? And then we'll show you pictures of each one, and we'll let you know. But as much as it's possible, I mean, the goal, at least for us, is that if you were looking at the comic book, you would have a shot in hell of figuring out what we would have called it, just by looking at the comic book without even seeing the picture of the comic. Now, if you guys have the archive edition, sweet, because then we can actually show you the comic book and say it's the one that looks like that. But we have Express and Pro and free users as well, and we don't want to screw you guys over. We're trying to help you as well. We don't want to make it so photo reference is absolutely required in order to sense any of these variants. But again, the job is getting harder and harder. What we're thinking is, when you get, and let's pull up my nightmare title of today. Let's pull up Deceased. All right. So with Deceased, and I'll make this a little larger, we have number 1, second printing of number 1. Third printing of number 1, right? So, some different colors to the background, some different colorations going on in the whole thing. 1A, it's kind of a zombie Batman. 1A2, which really is kind of funny because it really looks like a second printing of this one, but it's kind of not, because that's the Virgin cover with no logos on the top. 1A3, 1A4, which is like we got Joker with and without the logos and so forth. 1A5, the sketch cover, etc., etc., etc. It goes on and on and on. And it gets to the point where it drives us crazy. And then we once again down to the point where we run out of letters, and so we start abusing A. Just kind of at some point became it's one of variant-y ones, and we started just having to number the variants. And then there was another sequence of variants somehow. Honestly, I couldn't tell you how our sequence for naming these makes any sense at all. I mean, looking at the comic book, I'd say this is a complete fail. It's just that when you took the total number of these things, I suspect the way it really played out is we ran 1A through 1Z, and then the 27th one came over and we said, well, crap, what do we do now? We went back to 1A and we started adding to the printing, is exactly how I think that went down for us, because we had 40 comics we had to show variants for, and we ran out of space. Look, some of these ones are comic store variants. There might have been some semantic grouping we could have used on some of these ones had we known ahead of time how they were all going to play out. But frequently, we're just going to get caught unawares on these things. We won't know. It's very frequent for there to be one comic store that gets to have their own variant cover. We don't know if there's going to be 20, right? And so you can't always assign any kind of semantics to it all. Anyway, we had thought we thought of a number of things, but I think where we're coming down to, and I'll just cut to the chase on this part, is I think what we have to do is in order to keep the extensibility of it, is we need to stick with, well, first of all, we're not going to redesignate any variants that have been out there in the world, as with the possible exception of things like the Deceased thing, where the system just clearly broke down and we're lying to you about the printing. But for all the ones that fit under the A through Z kind of model, if it said this is the D cover, it's staying the D cover. We're not going back and revisiting that, because that would be an atomic bomb on everyone's collections. It would destroy every bit of sorting if we ever redesignated that level of variance across people. I think what we're going to do is, for variants beyond the 26th one, is we're just going to say this is V27, followed by V28, V29, V30, V31, etc., up to V frickin' 15 million if we have to. And the default description on that one will then be version number version number 27, version number 28, version number 29, etc. Okay, let's think back to our list of goals, right? So if I pull that one up again, so how'd we do? All right, well, extensible, that worked out okay. Guessable, well, not really. Look, to the extent that that you're looking at a barcode and you're looking at the first 9, you had a chance. At least the first A, B, C, D, F, G, etc. Those are going to follow. But yeah, no, guessable. There's no telling. I mean, again, what does the Giancarlo remarked Virgin Sketch retailer incentive cover look like? There's no way I'm getting that from any abbreviation that's just simply a number, right? So that one, that doesn't work. Descriptive also kind of fails. It gets as far as this is version 27, but didn't do anything for you. But we did hit short, so we scored on a couple of those. All right, so that's not great as a start, but what can we do to make that better, right? And so here's where we're thinking about doing something new. Actually, I was about to do the part where I actually get to take my glasses off. It's kind of weird. Any of you guys who are getting a little older wear glasses, you know that if you're talking to someone just face to face, you don't want to wear your glasses to them because it's just weird. I mean, the focus is all wrong and everything. And right now the camera is as far from me as it would be if we were just chatting in the room. So, you're thinking like, well, if I don't need to stare at a computer screen for a while, I just want to talk with you. I would typically take my glasses off. Unfortunately, as soon as I just did that, I realized I have to put my glasses on to talk about one more thing. Let's have a look at, let's take an easy one. Batman and Robin. Maybe this will work for me, maybe it won't. Let's find out. Alright, yeah, that's good enough. Alright, a number of years ago, we used to have a similar problem with some of this stuff, where we would have, in the notes, we'd put down, okay, this is a Batman Reborn tie-in, fair enough. And which is a little bit redundant with the fact that the storyline is Batman Reborn Part 1, but okay, no problem. I can do a fine for all the Batman Reborn tie-ins, and that tells me all those things. That's kind of interesting. But it used to be back in the day, we would then put in there next to that appearance, Batman Dick Grayson appearance, Robin Damian Wayne appearance, and then some people started saying, well, it'd be really neat to have a comprehensive index of every single appearance of, say, Ghost Rider or whatever else. And suddenly you wound up listing in the notes every character that had ever appeared everywhere, and the notes just got to be stupid. The notes would suddenly be 3,000 characters long, and they wouldn't fit on any label or fit on any report. And most people didn't really care about that cross-reference all that much. But we didn't want to give up the information because it's not a bad thing to want, to have the idea of having the ability to generate a character cross-reference or find me all the special appearances of Dick Grayson, so forth. So we rolled out this appearances field down here. And when we did that, what we did is the very first time you upgraded to the version of ComicBase that had appearances in it, it would go through all your notes automatically, and it would say, all right, let's take everything that looks like an appearance, and let's move it over. Right? So we took it out of here, and we put it in there. And then what had happened then, and this is worth commenting on, is there's a little bit of an ownership change. The notes, certain fields in ComicBase are exclusively yours, right? Like the custom fields, they're just for you guys. We don't touch them, we don't put anything in them, they're only you, right? But things like cover price, right? We think of that one pretty much as ours, right? Now, we will ask you before we make changes to things like that, but we think of that as one of the ones that, look, it's a matter of fact. It's not an opinion as to whether the cover price was $2.99 US. It either was or it wasn't. And so we wanted to make it so that there are certain fields that we mostly control. Again, we'll only change existing data with your permission, but if you give us that permission, we're going to change it, and we're going to overwrite what was in that field before. So, I mean, if you had it as $1, cover price, and we say it's $2.99, if you said you're allowed to update cover prices, it's going to get a $2.99 there. We're not going to say, and it used to be $1, Whereas notes is a strange one because notes is shared between us and you. Right. In other words, we might say this is the first appearance of, Dick Grayson's, special green glove, whatever. You might think that that's a stupid note, right? And frankly, you might have said, back in the day before we had locations or custom fields, people would say things like, this was in box 23. We don't want to know that it's in your box 23. So we don't necessarily take that in the notes. If we ever do take that in your notes, it's a mistake. So what happens is we came up with the idea that the notes field stacks. So if you had information in the notes field and then we had different information in the notes field, we're going to then append our information to the back of your information, and vice versa. It's like if you send us data, it gets added to what we've got if we need it. But if it's the store thing that we don't take, we just strip it off, and it's no harm, no foul. When we did appearances, we needed to establish as a matter of fact, look, Batman Dick Grayson was either in this or he wasn't. Robin Damian Wayne was either in this or he wasn't. And so we wanted the ability to say, look, the official ComicBase stance is the appearances on here were blah, etc. And if you allowed us to make corrections, we would wipe out whatever you had in your notes field and replace it with whatever the official version is. We're never going to do that to your notes, right? Well, which is why the notes is kind of a terrible place to put variant information, right? That's where we would also say things like, second printing, this is the, Chiarello variant cover, blah, 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 blah. That's where all that stuff is living right now, and it's a freaking mess. Let's go back to Deceased for a second. So, yeah, here we go. Here's a great example of one. All right. So we got the picture of Zombie Joker over here. Not a bad cover. And so here's the current notes on this one. Variant cover by John Zhang. Comics Elite Comics variant cover by John Zhang. Uh-oh. So what happened there? Well, the answer is once upon a time, someone would put down variant cover by John Zhang. All right. And then someone else came in and gave us a better version of the note. Right? And so we might have changed our master version to say, hey, Comics Elite Comics variant, covered by John Zhang. That's a better note than the old one. But the problem is, because this is the notes field, we're never going to wipe out your notes, and so the new information only stacks. And some of this just becomes downright redundant. Worst case, it becomes contradictory. But yeah, we got to get the variant stuff and the issue designation stuff out of the notes field, because otherwise we can never force an update of the field and make it stick. Otherwise you're just going to wind up with a confusing mess of information that is potentially contradictory for what these things are as we develop new information. So what we're thinking is we're going to take the example of the appearances field that we did way back when and come up with a new item description field where we're going to take everything that relates to the designation of the item itself, whether it's a second printing, whether it's the hardcover edition, whether it's the the John Zhang Comics Elite comic, whatever thing, and we're going to put all that stuff. We're going to pull it out of notes automatically, and we're going to put it into the item description field. And from that point forward, we will never pollute the notes field with that information. Now, there's a little bit of mojo you do to make the whole thing work, right? Because, like, for instance, whenever I print a identification label, I gotta know what the edition is all about, at which point we do the same thing we do with grading notes, which is another thing that used to be in the notes field, which then got its own field one day, is we're going to automatically append the issue identification, or probably prepend the issue identification information to the start of the notes whenever you print an identification label or a report label. But when you're actually looking in the database, or what are the notes for this issue, that stuff lives in its own field. So that is the long version of what we're thinking, is basically at some point in the probably pretty near future, unless we get a better idea. We're going to basically take on this whole thing. We're going to come up with a scheme for addressing, at least on an item number level, what do we call variants beyond the 27th one, the 26th, the variants beyond the 26th version that does not abuse the printing field. So in other words, we're not going to say something is the 7th printing or the 74th printing of something if it wasn't. We need to say this is just version number 71 of this particular issue. And it might have had a second printing too, and if so, we want to be able to say so and have that be real. We want to take the garbage out of the notes field and put it into some place where, if you allow us to, we're allowed to update it and give it an official designation that sticks and that doesn't become redundant with itself. And we'll probably use different, heuristics for, given a choice between like the variant covered by Zhan Jiang and ComicBase Comics variant covered by Zhan Jiang. Well, those notes are redundant. We can probably figure that out. Which one do we stick with? I don't know. My initial guess is go with the longer one. One of the things, and again, going back to the general idea, is this thing guessable? Well, I can't guess the abbreviation. We've given that up as soon as we start saying we need to make extensible enough to make any kind of sense as a code. But if I'm looking at the combination of the variant description or the item description and the item number, I should be able to look at that thing and say, yeah, that's definitely the one I'm looking at. So I guess that is version 74. So I should be able to say, yeah, this is the Comics Elite version on there. And we also get back the idea of it being descriptive, because there we have the ability to attach essentially to version 74 is the one with Ghoul Joker smiling with no logo type, on yellow background. We actually have some room to write things like that which physically describe the comic book. I personally would love to get us stylistically more in line with not only describing what the thing is that we're even saying the issue number is. This is the Chiarello variant, but I'd like to say Chiarello variant. Belladonna standing atop pile of corpses, or Red Sonja holding sword aloft with red sky in background. I mean, I would love to have something so that you can actually look at the description and know what the heck we're talking about when we're talking about the cover, without necessarily seeing the cover art up front. So that's kind of where our head's at. Let me do a quick check of the chat, because I've been talking for a very long time, and we'll see if we can't make any of this make any kind of sense. And this is, of course, it's doing. It's funny. You guys might wonder, why do I not do the mouse magnification as much as I used to? And it's because after you do it a couple times, for some reason the mouse software I've got makes it so it doesn't want to let me switch to other things very much. So I have to actually task manage. Richard says, Pete said a swear. I probably did. Let's see, it's like an episode of Picard. Right. Let's see. Hey, John says, so I'll see you guys last time in a live CB broadcast. John, we're going to miss you too, man. But anyway, congrats on the job. We testing any things would be like crossing streams. Absolutely. Let's see. Hoarder's Hide. What happens when you request a price check on issue 52? Well, when you to answer the question very briefly, it basically, if you say that a particular issue of Brave the Bold sells for much different than what we've got it at. Oops, sorry. Let's see. We're still on. Got to get the keys up. Oh, come on, back to me. Oh, sorry. Got to turn the. All right. I think. Switch back to me. Come on, you can do this. I got nothing. Yeah, I seem like I've lost my chroma key just now. Oh, that's exactly what happens. I lost my chroma key. That's why nothing's working. Okay, let's try this one more time. Sorry. All right. Boom. Excellent. Okay, so Horace Hyde asked, what happens when you request a price check on an issue? The short answer is it goes to our editors, and they will look for alternative pricing sources to indicate whether or not the price we've got is anywhere near right or wrong, and they'll make a manual adjustment if necessary. Some things, some things there's a lot of data that there are price checks we don't follow at all. I mean, it's like, yeah, you think the price on cable number one is very different than we say it is. Yeah, there's probably a couple hundred sales in the last couple months that say different, which, I feel like that one is about as dialed in as any comic can ever be. But there are other ones, especially Silver Age books or books that don't come up very frequently, where they're very given to, with low sales data, and especially when conditions vary a lot, they can swing quite a bit more than you would otherwise think. Now, more data tends to bring them back to the norm, but we're happy to give things a manual nudge if so. But it basically comes down to it goes to the editors, they check a bunch of other sources, and then they make a manual adjust if they feel it's justified. Salvador says, the comic gallery screensaver ever going to fix to work in Windows 10? It does fix in Windows 10, but it works in Windows 10 64-bit. It will never work in Windows 10 32-bit. So if you're using Windows 10 32-bit, definitely you need to upgrade. But definitely check your system information, and if it says you're running Windows 10 32-bit, unless your machine only has 2 gigabytes of RAM for some reason, which I can't imagine, you should be using a 64-bit version of Windows. And that was just a decision we made where we felt that it was not worth supporting 32-bit on it. Let's see here. Can I do a mock-up of what the new variant system would look like with one of those crazy variant issues? Send out a screenshot PDF. Very likely will, and certainly a great way to get in on some of that discussion is, again, if you guys are interested in joining the Slack group on that one. Let's see. Okay, so I think we got it. All right, so last thing I want to talk about, because I've been talking a really long time and I'm kind of losing my voice. So let me just cue this one up. So fun stuff, and we all need fun stuff, because there's not enough of it in the world. Fun stuff I've been seeing as you're working out or doing things that are getting back to normal life is been watching a bunch of Netflix has had a bunch of good stuff come down the pipe lately, but one that I'm just call it a guilty pleasure, call it whatever you want, but I'm going to say my pick of the week is going to go to a new Zack Snyder venture called Army of the Dead. Let me go ahead and put that one up here. Zack Snyder, having just gone and recut Justice League into something that was not a horrific mess, there's good and bad things to say about Zack, but you gotta say the guy knows how to shoot a film, and he knows how to certainly direct comic book stuff. He went out and decided, what if we took a heist movie and set it in Vegas, and instead of the criminals trying to fool the casino bosses or the police, what if we made it so that all of Vegas has been overrun with zombies, and you basically have to break in through a Vegas that's been completely turned into a zombie hellscape wasteland, and then also rob a bank. And it stars Dave Bautista, who looks bigger than I've ever seen him. He looks puny in Guardians of the Galaxy compared to this, but actually just a great bunch of directing, a lot of fun. And honestly, my folks used to live near Vegas, so it's just great for me. Even though it wasn't actually shot in Vegas, it's just this triumph of CGI, and so the practical effects were shot apparently in some disused casinos in the Jersey Shore. But absolute, unbelievable making of, if you want to see it, also available on Netflix. But that one is, I just gotta say, is just the most fun I've had watching a film in a while. So give that one a go. That would be my shot for the week. Anyway, I think that's gonna do it for me, because I am just about losing my thing. Let's see here. Pete, what do I think of the new Promise pedigree that's hit the news? I don't know what that is. Ed, tell me more. I'm going to have to Google that, but I do not know. Badges information. Yeah, I owe that to you guys. I'm going to get to it, but realistically, I don't have time today. I'm just going to have to... I will do some digging on that one, and we'll talk about that on the next show. All right, and Greg also wants to remind everyone, we've dedicated throughout the ComicBase message board. We can request live stream topics and demos. Yes, absolutely. Please, guys, do that. Thank you so much for hanging through this one. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys hanging out with us as we kind of talk through some of this is like library science from hell. It's like It's funny because it's the sort of thing that, like, it's like the grist of our lives. It's like, we're designing a contraption to get us to all the different places we go and think, I don't know, should we run it on this weird gasoline stuff they keep talking about it, or how about wood chips? I mean, it's funny because you sit there and say, well, this seemed like an esoteric discussion, but which decision you made at that critical juncture will have a lot of effect as to how easy it is to steer around the next long time using the whole thing. Making up a scheme for handling variants and things like that without breaking everything that has come before it it's ridiculously important. And yet, some people might think it's a little dry. So anyway, guys, if you got this far in the podcast, God bless you. Anyway, we're gonna do something else next time. I'll probably do more of a Q&A show, and we'll hit the badges. But thank you again for hanging in there, and we'll see you all next time. All right, bye.